And I will go ahead and turn the time over to Kenneth for tonight's topic, which is addiction. Thanks, Kenneth.
All right. Thank you, Wendy. Appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. Glad to have you here. This is a really important topic, and it's something that people struggle with everywhere in every walk of life, at every age, and to different degrees. And it's difficult because the addictions go in cycles usually. We commit ourselves to like getting better, and we try so hard, and then we fall on our face, and then we feel hopeless, and then we wonder if things are ever going to change. Or we wonder, like, can an addiction, is that something that can be healed? Is that something we can get over? Is that something my spouse can get over, my family member can get over? Or am I stuck forever? And when it's been years of trying and failing and trying and failing, it is really, really hard to believe that anything can change. And so you hear people saying, oh, this is just something I'm going to have to deal with the rest of my life. I actually disagree with that, and I will tell you why tonight. But I'm really grateful to be here teaching this class because addiction causes chains of despair. It weighs us down, and I want to help break them. I'm here to destroy things that threaten our hope. Because addiction keeps people at a distance from us. I mean, it hurts us when we're addicted, but it also hurts our relationships. There is a distance that develops when we're struggling with an addiction, typically. It's such a strain on just our life. It's a drain on our resources. We can't really thrive when all this energy is being taken up by an addiction or like trying to avoid an addiction. And I don't want anyone to have to live like that. I want people to have freedom in every sense of the word, power over fear, power over hopelessness, power over hate. That's what I'm about. That's what my company is about. That's why I do these presentations. I am here to help people see how their lives can be different, and then to take what they learn and to help teach other people. So I'm super glad that we're all here, and I'm glad that this is being recorded so other people can see it in the future. Hello, people from the future. Tonight, we're going to talk about the reason, if you're addicted to anything, the reason why you've tried before and failed, why that cycle happens where you're pushing so hard and nothing seems to work. It seems like this endless hamster wheel. So I'm curious, and you can throw this in the chat box if you want, or you can unmute yourself. As you're here tonight, I'd be interested to hear what kind of questions are on your mind, what kind of specific things you would like to have answered. You can go to the chat box and send it to everyone so everyone can see it, or just Wendy, she's the host, and then you know, the questions won't be associated with anyone's name, if you can just read them off anonymously. So if you have any of those, go ahead and type them out, or go ahead and unmute yourself. Because I'd like you to focus on, what do I want tonight? What am I looking for? Specifically, what do I want to know? When you go in with an idea of what you want to know, it's easier to come away with those answers. And many times we have those questions in the back of our mind, but we haven't really taken the work to put them into explicit language. And I've seen a massive difference in my life when I take that time to ask it out loud or to put it on paper. So I'll give you a second if anyone has anything. And if you're not sure completely, you can put it in the chat box as we go.
I have a question that I'll ask while I'm waiting for people to put it in the chat if they're thinking about questions, which is, and then maybe you're gonna cover this anyway, but I feel like there are always underlying reasons for addiction starting, and I feel like there's a lot of shame associated with addiction that doesn't need to be there, because there are things that are underlying causes for addiction that are not at all shameful, or that we didn't choose, or that we didn't do ourselves. that maybe talk a little bit about how we're affected by the stigma and the shame of addiction, and how to pinpoint underlying causes to help yourself understand, but also how to let go of that judgment of yourself when you are struggling with addiction.
Yes.
I'm assuming you're probably going to cover all that, but I just wanted to make sure that you were by asking the question up front.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with this then. What is addiction? I like to define it as using an external means to distract ourselves from internal feelings. So usually we don't want to feel pain, we don't want to feel fear, and there's a lot of, if you take pain and fear and put them through a prism, you get all different variations and shades of those. There's lots of different things we're running from, but in general, those seem to be the two things, pain and fear. And we try to cope with the feelings by running away from them, by using something to cover those feelings up and distract us. So that being said, I mean, sometimes we feel a little bit anxious and we eat an extra bowl of ice cream. Is that an addiction? Well, I think it's all on a spectrum, right? There's just the tiniest little bit that's pretty normal with everybody. And then there's like the really extreme versions where people are starving to death because they're spending all their money on heroin or something. But the thing that drives the cycle, like Wendy brought up, is very often shame. That's usually associated with most cases of addiction. That's the biggest pain that I have personally found people are running from. Of all the different types of pain we can have, that one is one of, I think, the lowest. It hurts. What's shame? Shame is when we feel inadequate. It's when we feel worthless, not good enough, not lovable. We feel broken. And then we think because we're broken, everything's hopeless. And we just can't stand that feeling of worthlessness because it is one of the worst things we can feel. And so then we start to run from it. And it makes sense because it sucks. Nobody wants to face that. Sometimes addiction is caused by people running from the pain of memories, things that they've been through, trauma they've experienced, and sometimes they're running from feelings of loneliness. That's another one that I see a lot, but in the end, it's all pain, and it's all us running from that pain. And the substance doesn't really matter. Addiction is using something to distract us from the feelings. And so that could be gambling or pornography or video games or working or cleaning our houses or going to the gym. Some of the addictions look better. There's some people you probably know, maybe you are one of them, whose house is never dirty and everything is in pristine order. And people go, oh my gosh, you got it together. What's wrong with me? Well, the thing driving it isn't the healthiest thing in the world, even though the outcome externally looks like it might be pretty good. But anything can be a distraction. Anything can be something that we use to run from the way that we feel. I'm going to focus tonight more on pornography, since that's a huge problem right now, especially in Utah. But just know that as I talk about pornography, this applies to every other kind of addiction. It's the same basic mechanics at the core of addiction. And one of the big myths that people have is that once I get married, this will go away. And it's just not true, not in the least, because one of the misconceptions we have about addiction, specifically pornography, is that it's about sex. Oh, if I have a sexual outlet, I'll be fine, right? No, it's not about sex. It's about those feelings of shame we feel that we don't want to feel. It's about the loneliness or whatever other kind of pain. And it just so happens that sex is the thing we chose. Or we could say sexual pleasure, because sexual intimacy between another person is not what the addiction is. And so that's a hard one, because we think like, oh, someday this will be over. And then it's not. And then we can feel even more hopeless. And that shame we feel, it naturally, since we don't feel good enough, we don't want anybody else to see it. You know, if we feel like we're not good enough, we don't want people to know it. And so we hide. And this is one of the most dangerous things about shame, that goes underground. It seeks to hide itself. So we're addicted, we're struggling, and we don't want anybody to know because, like Wendy mentioned, there's a stigma there. We kind of feel naked. I mean, depending on where you are, but certainly in Utah with LDS culture, shame is really associated with anything sexual. So a lot of people that have come from that background where pornography is a sin, then they're like, oh crap, I'm doing this sin. This is a problem. I don't want to tell anybody.
Well, and the same applies to drugs and alcohol too. There's a shame element of that almost as much, if not more, than there is with sex.
And even tobacco and caffeine, they really have a stigma.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what happens with this is we don't distinguish between guilt, which is, oh, I did something wrong, versus shame, which basically says, I am wrong. Like, I'm bad, I'm the broken thing. And that's not necessarily the fault of religion, but religion definitely can magnify it. This is something that kind of just comes as a stock thing with being a human. We feel bad. We all feel shame sometimes and in some ways, and we worry that we're not good enough. And so making that distinction is so important when it comes to addiction, that guilt is just, oh, I did something wrong. I should try to fix it as much as I can, versus, oh, I am broken. Because that's what gets us into a really messed up cycle I'll talk about in a second. But let's address for anyone who has come from an LDS background or who is in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints now, there's something that you really need to understand about addiction. According to that worldview, is pornography bad? Yes. Is it damaging and hurtful? Absolutely. Does it hurt relationships? Yes. There's a lot of negative effects that come along with pornography. So we can say, yeah, it's not a great thing. And we should be trying to stop it. But the problem is, like I said, we stick with the shame of like, oh no, I'm doing this thing, I have to stop right now. It's like, well, cool, yeah, that'd be great if you could, but right now where you're at, you can't. You just can't. If this is as good as you have been doing, that's as good as you can do right now. And the way that you're going to grow and transcend this addiction is going to be slow and step by step. And if you can't stand the fact that you're addicted and you think it has to change now, the pressure you put on yourself will crush you. And so if you're religious and you're thinking, oh no, God's mad at me, I can guarantee he's not. Because he understands what it's like to be mortal. He knows how difficult it is to have addiction, to have a body that we're trying to change, that we're trying to refine and purify and sanctify. And he sees the future and the past and the present all as one. So it's not like he's going along with us in the present going, okay, they're doing a good job, I like them. And then we screw up and he's like, oh, look at that. Oh my gosh, they screwed up. They're terrible. I'm angry at them. They've sinned. Now I'm going to be grumpy. He already knew it was going to happen. He sees the future. It doesn't surprise him. He just is going like a coach. He's on the sideline going, hey, get up and try again. And us refusing to accept that sin's kind of inevitable. You can't not sin. There's going to be a certain amount of sin until you grow out of it. If we can't accept those truths, we're going to be stuck. And that is really hard to wrap your mind around. I know from personal experience, when we think like, well, I'm bad, I have to change now. It's like, no, God doesn't see us that way. That's not how it works.
Well, and even if you're not religious or spiritual, then part of this existence, well, however you think about it, is that you're not going to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes. You're not going to do everything even the way that you want to do it. And so even barring religion from that, that's just a fact of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everyone has it regardless of religion. And so it's weird. We have to kind of have this sort of toleration for imperfection. That doesn't mean that like it should be tolerated. I'm not saying like we should be like, oh, it's okay, you know, it's fine, do whatever you want. Obviously, we should be working on growing and changing, but you have to be okay with the fact that this is the best you can do right now. And this can be really hard to accept, but I promise it's true. So when we have all this shame driving us, we're trying to hide it, and it's such a deep and painful thing that quite often we deny it exists. And that brings on this whole other layer of complexity, because if you can't admit, yes, I'm addicted, yeah, I feel like crap, it'll never change. We have to be able to look at ourselves in the mirror and be honest and say, yes, okay, no more excuses, no more justification, no more rationalization. I'm addicted. I don't like that word, but I'm having a hard time stopping this on my own. And sometimes we try to tell ourselves, like, it's fine, I'm growing, I'm all right. But deep down, as we look into our hearts, we know we're feeding ourselves a bunch of BS. So it starts with the honesty. But what usually happens then is we're in this cycle, we're like, no, everything's fine. We are white knuckling our way through. We're just like, willpower, I will not fall into addiction again. But then we eventually do, because you don't have enough willpower to force your way out of addiction. I mean, maybe after years of practice, you can get to this kind of like robotic, oh, I will stay away from it, but that is not the way to live. That's not a way to be in balance. Then we relapse, we feel hopeless again, and basically here's how it works. Let me pull up the whiteboard. Oops, Wendy, could you turn on the whiteboard for me? I can't hear you.
Sorry. I am trying to, but for some reason my computer is logged out of Zoom, so I'm only here as a guest, which is why I wasn't seeing anybody. And then I tried to log in with the wrong password, and now it's kicked me out for 30 minutes.
Oh, fun.
So I can't log in as the host. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. So let me simplify the basic way this works. Imagine you're seeing self-loathing right here, because we hate ourselves. We feel like we're not good enough. The shame, the self-loathing is there. The arrow then leads to, well, how do we deal with that? When we feel hopeless and crappy, we want to change our emotions as fast as we can. So what do? We turn to the addiction. And now the self-loathing has led to relapse. And then we relapse and we feel back to the self-loathing, like, oh, why do I suck so bad? And this is this never-ending closed loop. It's the self-loathing that creates the relapse. There's this myth out there that if you're addicted to anything, I know you struggle with. This myth is that if I feel bad enough, if I beat myself up enough, I won't want to do it anymore. Because that's how we fix problems, right? We punish ourselves, we punish others. We have the biggest prison system in the world. We also have a huge recidivism problem, because just punishing somebody doesn't actually change their behaviors, not very much or not for long. And so we sit here and we beat ourselves up and we use shame like a club. It's like we're running around a track and we're not going fast enough. And so we stop what we're doing and we sit down and we start punching ourselves in the legs and we're like, go faster, legs, why do you suck so bad? Number one, we've paused running our race to beat ourselves up. And number two, we damaged ourselves so that it's harder to get up and run with injured legs. If I could just take this truth and beam it into your souls, I totally would, because if you don't get this, nothing's going to change. Self-loathing, the shame, drives the relapse. And so if we want to stop the relapse, we can't just like hold on to self-loathing but not do anything about it. No, we're humans. We feel stuff and it's overwhelming and we're going to have to feel something. And so if we don't get rid of the self-loathing, we don't get rid of the addiction. So
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is it common for people to project their self-loathing onto other people, and make it feel like it's other people that hate us rather than ourselves? Does that make sense? For us to go, oh, well, I feel this way because so-and-so is always disappointed in me, my mom or my whatever, and kind of make them that substitute so that it maybe doesn't feel like self-loathing, but it is. Does that make sense?
For sure. There are so
Is
many
that
ways we
common?
lie to ourselves. Yeah, we absolutely do that sometimes. Not everybody, just depends on the person. But if it's not that particular form of it, we tend to blame anything else, even if it's ourselves. And that's the thing about shame. Shame just says, let's blame ourselves and beat ourselves up. Guilt says, I will take responsibility to fix this. Does that make sense? That distinction, that is so vital to know. Shame just says, who's the bad person? Who gets the blame? Okay, we've chosen the black sheep. We've chosen the bad person. Now you just sit there and feel bad. It doesn't change anything. Feeling bad doesn't change anything. Taking responsibility, that does. And that can be very difficult to do when you're sitting there feeling crappy and beating yourselves up. So just trying to change your behaviors.
Can I make one other comment really
Sure, sure.
fast? I just wanted to say, not to say that there are not other people who are disappointed in us or who do shame us outside of ourselves as well. I didn't want to minimize that if that is somebody's lived experience too, because I definitely have experienced that as well. But I just wanted to add that in there, that sometimes other people are shaming us, but either way, whether it's ourselves or somebody else, we take responsibility for our behavior.
Yeah, definitely. So it doesn't matter how much you try to change your behavior, how much you try to avoid relapse or help someone else try to avoid relapse. If we're just looking at the behaviors, you can put all the kind of internet filters on, you can lock the phones and turn off the apps and everything. But if you let self-loathing become the motive, you're just not going to change anything. We can't fix the problem of addiction if we don't address the problem. And the problem with addiction is not the thing we're addicted to. It's not the pornography. I mean, that's related, obviously, and there are things we need to do to avoid the stimulus. But the problem is the motive that's driving it. It's always the emotion. I always say, where there's smoke, there's fire. You can look up in the mountains almost any time during the year, it seems, and see smoke somewhere. Something's on fire. And we don't necessarily see the fire. And we're annoyed the smoke is there because it ruins the air quality and it smells. Or like, why won't this go away? But if we want to get rid of smoke, we actually have to do something about the cause of it. And those emotions are always going to be the cause. But we don't want to do that. We don't want to face this. We don't want to face the memories. We don't want to feel the feelings of loneliness. We basically don't want to go into the cave and slay the dragon. The addiction thing that keeps us from having to confront the dragon in the first place. And so we will do anything else because, ew, who wants to? You know, I've had people say to me in the past, I've had parents come in and say, I want to help my kid. And so I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about, you know, how do you feel about yourself? How do you interact with your child? Oh, you're yelling at, okay, interesting. What are you feeling when you're yelling? And they're like, no, I don't want to work on myself. I just want to help them. I'm like, sorry, it doesn't work that way. If you want to change them and help them, you have to start with you, and you have to go to those uncomfortable places that you don't want to face and ask yourself, what's driving my behavior that might be evoking something in my kid? The change has to be a fundamental change. And so that means facing the dragon down face to face. What you need most is found in the last place you want to look for it. It's going to be in the dark places. That's where we have to look. We like to say, no, it's fine. I'll work around that thing. I don't want to go in there. But it just doesn't work that way. So the difference here, there's a thing called first order change, where we just change the behavior. And then there's a thing called second order change, where we actually change the deeper underlying rules of the system. For example, if someday a rattlesnake comes into your house, you're like, oh no, well, I guess this rattlesnake's just gonna live with us. Okay, let's put up the gate for the pets and try to keep it out. And if anybody ever comes over to visit, we'll make them wear cowboy boots. So the snake won't be able to get them unless they go above the knee. Okay, we'll have like someone who can always be on rattlesnake duty watching to make sure we know where it is. And you can put yourself through all of these hoops to try to avoid the rattlesnake and change the behaviors around it. But that's just the first order change. And the problem is there's still a rattlesnake living in your house. The second order change would be, let's get rid of the rattlesnake. Maybe let's kick it out so we don't have to go through all of these contortions. That's the kind of change we need to be looking for. And so when you dump the shame, when you really recognize, like, okay, I'm addicted, that's okay. Yeah, it's actually okay to be addicted. Isn't that weird? Wow. We can stop hating ourselves for being imperfect. And I tell you that it's a magical thing. When my clients get this, I've watched it happen where it dawns on them like, it's okay. I'm all right. It's like a switch is flipped and they start changing from that day on like they never had before. There's first this inner change there. It's an internal thing of like, I love myself, even though I'm imperfect. And then, yeah, like changing the actual behaviors is still, it's a lot of work, but it's a completely different process now that they feel different about it. We have to accept our imperfections in order to move forward. And we have to recognize that changing our behaviors is no joke. It's a huge amount of work because to change your behavior, you have to rewire your brain. And when I say rewire, like that's literal. You have little pathways in your brain that the electricity flows down. And those pathways have to be covered with a myelin sheath to insulate them so the electricity will actually go down the cable. And when you sleep, your brain goes through the rewiring based on what you experienced that day. I remember I was trying to learn the drums once. And I was trying to get this syncopated beat between my foot and my hand. I was trying to oomta, oomta, oomta. I couldn't do it. I could not do it. And it was so frustrating. And I sat there trying and trying and trying, showing my brain, hey, brain, this is what I want you to learn. And it's like, okay, well, give us some time to rewire. Like this takes energy. And it rewires while we sleep. So I went to bed and I woke up the next day and I sat down and I could do it. It was amazing. We put in all the practice and hard work and training. And then our brain goes, oh, this must be important. Okay, let's try to start growing those pathways and then beefing them up and getting them stronger. But that takes lots and lots of time. Every time we come to the decision of like, will I give into shame and addiction or will I love myself and do something more healthy? We have to like go down that fork. The easy way, it's downhill and it's paved. Like addiction's already there. You've already practiced going down the addiction road so many times that it is automatic. You're not even thinking about it, and that's part of the problem. We're not even aware. We start going down that path and we're like, oh no, what happened? And to go left at the fork instead, like pill, and it is through the bushes, and we have to have a machete, and it's hard work, and it takes sweat and toil, and you have to go down that trail repeatedly, hacking away the brush, paving, clearing out the rocks, getting it smooth, getting it flat, bringing in the bulldozers, laying down the asphalt. Eventually, with a lot of work, it can be like this nice smooth highway. And then you come to the fork and you're like, oh, no, that's gross. Let's go this way. This is better. But it's not like you learn this stuff and it just magically changes. Not at all. So many times I'm working with clients who have some kind of an addiction and they're saying like, oh, we've been talking about this for months. Why haven't I changed yet? And that's a good question. And the answer is there's a big difference between knowing something. Here's one of the myths that we walk around with. We think that if we learn something intellectually, it should automatically translate into our behaviors. You're just hearing it once and ding, like, oh, I should eat vegetables and go to the gym. Okay, from that day forward, we go to the gym every day and we eat healthy. Like, that's not how it works. There's a part of your brain called the striatum. And that's the part of your brain that controls your actions, your behaviors, your habits. And that striatum is far, far away from the part of our brain that stores like book knowledge and theory and what you hear in a YouTube lecture from the American Fourth Library. You can know all this like the back of your hand and still struggle. It takes time to take that information and build it into those behavioral pathways and build that connection. So we need so much patience with ourselves as we go through this. And when it comes to changing the addiction, like I said, that the path is already downhill and it's paved and it's easy. If you get too close to the edge, you're going to fall off. So you're not trying to like see how close you can get before you slip, because if we look at this hill here, hang on. You gotta bend this without bending it too much. It's a painting, and I don't want to ruin my painting. Oh, this will work. Lots of papers. All right, so if we're looking at this cliff edge here, and we have our little stick figure, Mr. Tweezer. Here, it's flat. You're pretty safe, right? And you can go here, and you're starting to lean a little bit, but you're not going to fall. But if you go right here, you're really on some unstable footing, and one little slip and you're off. And if you take one more step, there's no way you can possibly stay up. And that's what it's like with addiction. The name of the game is prevention. You want to make sure that you stay so far away from the edge. You need to find out, like, what is the thing that happens right before I have a relapse? Cool. What's the thing that happens before that thing? And what's the thing that happens before that thing? And then you're on the lookout for that very first thing. Maybe it's your boss yells at you at work, and then you get angry. Then you go home and you start stewing, and you start listening to some angry music. And that's when you relapse. Well, then you need to know, okay, if my boss yells at me, I need to do something immediately then, right then, and not go to stewing and holding a grudge and thinking what a jerk he is and then listening to angry music. We need to do something different at that point. It's all about the prevention so that we can stay away from that slippery edge. So we could say addiction exists at a certain energy level. And when I say energy, I'm referring to the sum total of the emotions we have, the moods that we're in, the beliefs we have, and also our habits. Because when we're at high energy, we have good habits. When I'm at high energy, I wake up around 5:30 and I go out to the front room and I go through my morning routine. So I look at my vision board and I do declarations and I write in my journal and I do meditation and I do spirituality and connecting with my higher power. And I feel good, I feel powerful. And then I make my list of what I want to accomplish that day and I go do it. And when I'm at low energy, I sleep in because I've stayed up late watching TV. And then when I sleep in, I don't have time to do my morning routine. And then I go through the day like a zombie and I mostly waste time with entertainment or recreation of some sort. Guess which time you're more liable to fall to addiction, when you're high energy or low energy. Part of being at high energy is being aware. You're being conscious. Most of our life is run on autopilot by that little striatum. And so getting at high energy gets us into a state of more awareness. We go, what am I feeling? What am I thinking? What am I doing? Why is this happening? We're questioning these things. And so then when our boss yells at us, we go, that's my trigger. That's my first trigger. I better deal with this right now. And if we haven't gone through the motions to get us to high energy that day, then we'll automatically go down that slippery slope because it's easy and we've practiced it. And it's a testament to how powerful our habits are. So if we can practice living at high energy, then we're practicing creating these new habits that'll just be kind of an automatic thing. And as I've done this, my life's gotten so much better because it's just kind of a normal thing now for me to wake up early. I still sleep in sometimes, I still stay up too late, but in general, like, I mostly get up and take care of myself, and it works. So this high energy approach to life is what you could basically call an approach-based system. In psychology, there's a thing called approach-based, where you approach the thing that you want. I want to change, cool. Versus the opposite of that is an avoidance-based strategy, where we say, I will run away from the thing I don't want. And when we're approaching what we want, then we are trying to meet the needs of ourself, of our inner person, the needs of our spirit, you could say. And we're trying to live in balance. So self-care is huge when it comes to taking care of addiction, because if you're not taking care of your emotions, then all that gunk's building up, all of the pain, all the fear, all the whatever you're struggling with, all the shame is hanging out. And if you don't do anything directly with it, you'll try to ignore it and cover it up with addiction. So high energy means self-care. It means a deliberate approach to taking care of all of our needs and to do so in balance. So this is how we change. That's how you do it. I know that I'm being kind of theoretical here, and this is a little abstract. We'll get to some concrete in a bit. But what if you're trying to help someone else through an addiction? First of all, you have to ask yourself, do they actually want to change? Because sometimes they don't. And that's why we have interventions, right? But sometimes people want to change, but they don't think that they can. And so they don't want to try because it's way too painful to attempt it one more time, only to fall down one more time. And so if that's the case, I'd recommend having a discussion with them about hopelessness. And you have to be very careful here and make sure that they feel very safe with you. Because if this is something you've maybe harped on in the past and you bring up, they're immediately going to feel shame. And that's what's so sneaky about this. You trigger their shame, they're more likely to turn to the addiction. And so sometimes we feel like, I can't talk about this. And that's why it can be helpful to have someone else. If they have a close friend that they can talk to about it, or a therapist, that's definitely easier. But when someone else has an addiction in your life, we have to remember that it's not about us. It's about them dealing with their needs. And so we need to deal with our needs, but we need to make sure we're doing it in a healthy way and meeting the needs rather than trying to run and distract us from the things that are hard. I work with a lot of couples where, you know, the husband's addicted to pornography. And sometimes the wife's okay, she doesn't struggle as much with it. And sometimes it's very, very difficult. And I can tell you the thing that makes the difference between the level of struggle is how much the wife takes that personally. And I understand why. I understand why, because if your husband's looking at other women, we ask yourself, like, what's wrong with me? Clearly, I'm not enough, but it's not about you, and it never was. This was always about finding something to distract. And existence and nature have wired us to be interested in the opposite sex. So as much as it seems like it's you, it's not. And every time there's a relapse, the other thing that makes it hard is believing that, like, oh yeah, nothing's going to change. This has happened 84 times. But it'll continue to happen until the shame is dealt with. But if we remember that change is slow and it's okay, and when we screw up or when they screw up, we just go, oh, it's all right, get up and try again. That's when things are manageable. That's when things are doable, because we recognize it takes time to change. Now, if you're just holding on to hope and trying to be like, no, everything's fine, it'll get better someday, but you're not addressing the problem, or they're not addressing the core issue, then that's a false hope. And that's really hard, because you'll try so hard and so long. And then you'll come to this point where you're just done. You're like, I can't do this anymore because nothing's changing. And it's true. We can't have false hope. We need to make sure that we place it in true things like, okay, they're actually dealing with the cause of their addiction. And that's why I can hope that things will get better. Because with enough effort and time, they totally will. So when people fall and have another relapse, we need to remember that they're already feeling so much shame, and they don't need lectures. What they just need is love and support and hope. Like, hey, it's all right. You can try again. So in order to help other people with their emotions, we basically have to start with managing our own. And if you can remind them of the truths that they've forgotten, that will help too, because I can guarantee after a relapse, they start feeling like, I need to punish myself until I improve. And there's probably no hope that I'm going to improve, because how many times have I gone through the same stupid cycle? It's important for somebody who's struggling with an addiction to have an accountability partner. That's why it can be helpful to go to an addiction recovery group. But that doesn't necessarily have to be you. You might not have the energy or the emotional bandwidth at the moment to deal with that. It might be too difficult, and it may be important for you to just manage your own feelings, because being married to someone who's addicted is its own struggle and its own journey. And to try to like handle your stuff and theirs can be too much and overwhelming. And so make sure they have somebody that they can talk to about it that's not going to get triggered by it. So decide how comfortable you are and what role you want to play. Because some wives are like, yeah, I can be the accountability partner. It doesn't bother me too much anymore. I know this is about him. And for some women, it's very devastating. And it's not just women, sometimes it's husbands too. But when it happens, we need to remember it's not the end. There's hope. There's absolutely hope, and there's always hope. So I've given you kind of the overview. These are the most important truths that you need to understand about addiction. And these are the ones that I don't see out there very often being taught. And if we're missing one of these, it can be really hard to change and grow. And so I wanted to give you kind of the more hidden truths, the hidden knowledge that you're not finding often. And then the other resources out there will be even more useful for you. But I'd like to do an activity. I'd like you to pull out something to write on. And let's get nitty gritty and find the triggers. Find what the things are that start the relapse. So go to the last relapse you had and ask yourself what happened right before that. And write that down, and then let's draw an arrow and go back to the thing before that. What were you doing? And I want you to write these questions down. What was I doing? What was I feeling? What was I thinking? Think, feel, do. That's how it happens. We think something, even if it's subconscious, we feel it, and then we do it. We act out the script. So at every point in this, at this stage, what was I doing? What was I feeling? What was I thinking? What was I doing, feeling, and thinking before that, and try to go a couple of steps. You might not be able to find super clear things as you go back, because this may have way more to do with just the overall energy your life is at. Maybe you've been living on the edge and you haven't known it, and it just took one stray thing to knock you off. Maybe we need to back up and look at the overall, like, how am I doing with my life in general? What kind of energy level am I living on? And ask yourself, what are the main emotional triggers for you? Is it loneliness? Is it trauma? Is it shame? And write that down. And start looking for it in your life. And when it pops up, I want you to write this question down. What's it like when I feel this? The other thing I'd like you to look at as you're writing down the triggers and what the steps are that lead to the relapse. Where are you? When did it happen? Because if you start tracking this, you'll notice there's definitely patterns. It might be with certain people or when you're alone. It might be at certain times in the night. Guarantee if you're tired, it's probably going to be happening then. It's going to be much more likely. The where is really important too, because our behaviors are dependent on the context. If you're at the bar, it's a lot harder to say no than if you're at the park. Part of it's being surrounded by the temptations, but part of it's just the associations. Sometimes when people are dealing with alcoholism, they can't smell cigarette smoke because that has been associated with the alcohol. So just the smell can set them off and trigger that. So tracking these is the start. And what we're looking at here, if we can get the bird's eye view, I'm asking you to do this activity because this is going to start to make you more aware. This is going to help you to get out of that autopilot mode that we spend so much of our day in. When we start living at a higher level of consciousness and awareness, we're watching what we do. We're asking ourselves why. We're noticing patterns and going, how long has that been there? Oh my gosh, I've been doing this since I was 12. Why do I do this? What are the emotions that drive me? Awareness is one of the first steps. Start writing everything down. When you have a relapse, you can get excited because you have data now. You can dig through this and go, cool, where was I? When did this happen? Was I around anybody? What were the triggers? What was I thinking? What was I feeling? What was I doing? And as you start to map this out, you start to find the patterns. And the patterns, as I said, start with the thoughts you were thinking, the beliefs that you have. So maybe your spouse yells at you, and that's your trigger. And you think, okay, well, My spouse is yelling at me. They're my addiction trigger. I need to stay away from my spouse. No, let's dig a little bit deeper. When they yell at you, what does that make you think? What does that make you feel? And this might take a couple weeks of digging to figure out. Because these reactions, when I say you're thinking it, I don't mean the voice in your head that narrates your day, that blah, blah, blah. I'm talking about the deeper subconscious beliefs where you may start realizing you feel something like, I'm inadequate as a husband. I'm not a good father. I'm not a good mother. I'm not a good person. I am bad. I'm not good enough. So you realize like, oh, okay, they yell at me. Then I start feeling like I'm not good enough. Then I feel shame. And the shame and the thought, they happen in the same instant. But it's the belief that starts it. Because when we stop feeling like there is something wrong with us, we stop feeling shame. And that's how we're able to transcend everything. That's how we really, truly heal. You might be asking yourself, can we really change? Yeah, you can. And it happens when you start living at a higher energy level. And one of the main things that will make you live at a high energy level, not just going to the gym or eating your veggies, it's changing the belief that there's something wrong with you and that you shouldn't be addicted. If you are, you are. Cool. That can be different as long as you accept where you are right now. So those beliefs have to shift. We have to accept that I have problems and that's okay. I love myself even though I have problems. And every time I have a relapse, I get right back up and I write about what happened and I work on changing those feelings. We all have this, whether we have addictions or not. We have these beliefs that create our emotional reality. I was sitting here today putting the finishing touches on this presentation. And I had a lot of other things I was doing. And I stopped working on this for a little bit and I got into some work stuff. And I was kind of thinking like, oh, what are we gonna have for dinner tonight? Maybe we could go to Chubby's and we can keep watching Lost. And then the thought came up, you have a class tonight. And I was like, oh no, there was like this feeling of anxiety and dread that rose up. And I had to pause everything I was doing and I was like, whoa, what belief caused that? I like presenting. I begged the library to let me present. So why do I feel this? And as I like just sat with my feelings and accepted them and breathed through them, like, oh, it's okay. All right, body, we're fine. I realized that the belief was something's taken away your freedom. If you don't have time to make all your choices and do whatever you want to do, then you've been restricted. And restriction means bad, scary. That's about as deep as I've gotten so far. I don't know why that loss of freedom created a sense of dread, but I'm going to keep working on that because I want to live totally free from negative emotions that I don't need to feel. I want to look at my list of responsibilities. I want to look at my checklist of all the things I need to do, like getting on insurance panels, sending invoices. I want to look at it and go, oh yeah, cool, I can do that. This is going to be a great day. This isn't, oh, drudgery, misery. I have to force myself to do it. And I'll mostly just like get on YouTube and distract myself from having to work. No, I want to have an instant reaction where my belief says, this is great. We love handling responsibility. I love being on top of things. And in fact, that's something I actually say to myself in the mornings. I love my responsibilities. I love feeling like I'm on top of things because I'm trying to change that belief because I know when I do, I won't get the dread anymore and I won't get procrastination anymore because I'll be approaching this with a totally different mindset. And my hope one day is to be free from everything negative that can possibly be gotten rid of. And it works, and I've done it, and I've gotten rid of my self-loathing. I mean, I may have like 5% left, but man, I've come a long way because I've been working on this. I'm living proof that what I've taught you tonight works. You can heal, you can change, and you can love yourself even though you're not perfect. And even though that sounds impossible, I promise you it's absolutely doable. So keep being aware, keep tracking this stuff, keep writing it down, keep searching, be interested, be curious. Don't turn away from this because it's uncomfortable. Yep, I feel shame. Sometimes I hate myself, and I'm going to figure out why, and I'm going to do something about it. Does anybody have any questions about anything so far? Any questions about addiction, anything we've talked about here, or anything tangentially, even if you're like, oh, it's not too related, please go ahead. I would love to answer some questions. I just see these names on the screen. I have no idea who you are, how you're taking this.
I have a question. Will you just really quickly summarize kind of the basic steps to take when you are trying to identify sources of your shame and your addiction and where it comes from, and how to write that down, and kind of how to explore that as a way of understanding why you're doing what you're doing? Just that kind of simple step by step.
Yep. Let me put in the chat box here. After the relapse, we want to ask, like, where were we? When did it happen? Also, what was I thinking?
I'm pretty sure the whiteboard's on now. I think you can share.
Okay.
If you need to.
Wait. So put that in there.
Maybe.
It's working.
Oh.
Okay. Everybody see that?
Yep.
Thinking, feeling, doing. And then track that back. You can be asking yourself during this time, like, when did this start? Not just the relapse or the cause of the relapse, but this pattern in my life. What is the pattern? And I would highly recommend that you write this out on paper and you draw arrows. If you track it on paper and you know your pattern of like the thoughts and the feelings and the actions and how it all goes, you will have so much power to start changing things. And this is one of the first things I do when I do couples counseling, or as we're talking about addiction, you know, we're tracking what's going on so that they can understand this on a higher level.
And so once you understand what you're thinking and feeling and doing, then the place to start changing something is there, not with the actual addicted behavior. You go, oh, I was doing this thing and that made me feel this way or whatever. And then you start changing what's happening that you know is triggering the behavior first, rather than trying to change the behavior that is almost definitely not going to change without changing the precursors to it. Is that a good summary?
It can still be really helpful to have a replacement behavior right there in the moment. If you can do something, try to jump to. It'll be a lot harder though if you really let those feelings carry you. Oh, it's so hard. I mean, I remember one time we had just been married for like a year. I wasn't making any money at all. And every time my wife wanted to talk about the budget, I just felt like crap. I felt like garbage. I'm like, I'm not a provider. And she knew I would sink into shame. And so she like stopped bringing it up, and she had to suffer with this on her own. And that's one of the other ways this can really hurt our relationships. But I remember this time we had gone out for a walk and we were sitting on the curb, and she brought it up and I felt myself sink down. But I knew that when I sink into shame, I disconnect from her, and she needs me to talk to her. She needs to discuss our life together and our finances. I had to sit there and just go, all right, we may not be a great provider right now, but we're going to stick with it. We're going to help her. We're going to talk about this. I can face this. I can feel this feeling and still breathe and be okay. It was a monumental effort. And I think if you look at my life achievements, that's going to be on the trophy board at the end of everything. Very difficult, but it took years of working up to. So we want to definitely start with the smaller things that make you feel shame. Find all those little thoughts that make you feel shame. And then start asking yourself, like, why is this not true? Find the beliefs that cause shame. Ask why they're not true. You can also ask a friend. It's really helpful. Or ask yourself, if a friend came to me and said this, like, well, I'm horrible because I'm not a good provider, like, what would I tell them? I'd probably say, hey man, you're still an intern. It's new in your career. You're going to learn and grow. This is temporary. It's all right. And you would be right. And then things would change and you'd feel better. And so hold on to hope. And remember that, like, we can't put a pass-fail grade on right now.
There is a chat question as well, if you're...
Okay. I can't see it. Where do I get my...
I said, what would you say is the best way to help someone who's falling into addiction rather than pointing it out and adding to their shame? What should we be doing instead?
So that really, I think, in part might depend on the person. If this is a kid, if this is someone you have a stewardship over, it's important to address it and address it head on. And maybe you start with a story from your own life about shame and how you've dealt with that, kind of ease into it a little bit. If this is a partner, kind of the same thing. Even though it's going to trigger their shame, that's not necessarily a reason to avoid it, because shame's the problem. And so maybe we go in and we soften it on the front end, like, hey, I need to talk to you about something, and it's going to be hard for you because it's going to bring up shame. And I just want you to know that you're okay. It's okay for you to be imperfect. And I love you just the way that you are, even if you don't love yourself the way that you are right now. I'm seeing this problem developing, and I think we need to fix it. And that's nothing on you. You're not bad because this is a thing. You're a normal human going through a normal experience. We need to do so much work to destigmatize addiction. It's so absolutely normal for humans. So many people fall into it. We all have our little ways, like some people struggle with things more than others. My food addiction, we obviously have to eat it to live, but, like, you know, sugar has been a millstone around my neck for most of my life, but I'm slowly getting better, even if it's little. We all struggle with this in some way. It's just a universal human experience. And so we need to really try to destigmatize it and talk about it openly, because there's not shame in it, even though we think it is, and that holds it in place. Does that answer the question, or did you want to give me more specifics I could help you with that?
Yeah, you can put more specifics in the chat if you want to. I have another suggestion too, which maybe is a given considering what Kenneth has been talking about, but you yourself could start recognizing what triggers their relapses, what happens right before. I mean, and you obviously don't know what they're thinking and what they're feeling, but sometimes you can tell, you can know what they're doing before they relapse and start paying attention to, you know, things that you can recognize triggers in other people, and start without them knowing, you can start helping them to avoid those triggering situations by just saying, hey, let's do this, instead of a thing that you were going to do that you notice might be triggering to them.
For sure. Let me share something with you really quick here. This is called the 7 layers of intimacy. These are the 7 layers that you can connect with someone on. And as you go from the top down, it gets more and more intimate. And we're talking about kind of the feelings, fears, failures, weaknesses, needs, the lower stuff on the pyramid. These are going to be the things that are driving the addiction. And so in order to help somebody with them, we need to make sure that our relationship is at that deeper level where they feel safe talking to us about those things. And you know what? Sometimes they don't feel safe. Sometimes it's not our fault. Sometimes it's the shame trying to make us hide. but usually there is something we can do to clean up our relationships, something that we need to take responsibility for, and just call out, hey, you know what, you were sharing this thing you wanted to do and I just shot you down. I didn't even like hear you out or listen to you, and I felt bad about it, and I just wanted to apologize and let you know that I care about what you care about. And if we do that, hopefully they'll be willing to open the gate and let us in a layer deeper. But we constantly have to make sure we're being safe. We're being a safe place for other people to share with. Any other questions about this or any other therapy topic? You can either unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Okay. Well, if you have any questions that you don't want to share in this public forum, let me put my email address in here, and I'd be happy to talk with you. Ooh, how important is self-talk? Someone asks. Here's my email. Self-talk is so important. Yes, because it's related to the thoughts that we think, and our self-talk is usually a result of those deeper beliefs we have. So when we say like, oh, you're such an idiot, why do you screw that up? Why can't you get your crap together? That just heaps on the shame. And so self-talk is one of the best ways we can start to reverse that. So today when I had my like anxiety moment, I was talking to myself. I was going, hey, we're okay. And I was literally like tapping myself, being like, okay, buddy, we're all right. And I was speaking this in a loving, compassionate way to myself, really trying to like wrap myself up with warmth and acceptance. And I felt this warm blanket, kind of like fire whoosh up in my chest. I was like, oh, this is nice. This feels good. Self-compassion is the opposite of self-loathing. So we need to be very careful the words that we speak, because they are tools of creation. And it starts inside of us. And then it starts to manifest on the outside. There's a deep secret right there. So you may want to make an inventory. What do I say to myself? What are the things that I maybe emotionally just beat myself up with? When you choose to go into that self-loathing energy, you're basically saying, you're dumb, you're bad, you suck. Why are you like this? You should change. And that doesn't work. So if we say, hey, it's okay, you're addicted, that's fine, I love you anyway. The growth is so much faster. I think it's like, it's the difference between hiking a mountain with a backpack that weighs 300 pounds and taking it off. We progress so much faster when we love ourselves. Anything else before we end? All right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Kenneth. That is super helpful. Thank you so much for being willing to share what you know with our community, and put yourself out there. I wanted to also reiterate that next month is the last class in this series of AF Aware. It is, I should have looked up the date before I started talking. It is June. Hang on, I'll get there. It is June 10th. June 10th. At 7 o'clock. You can register for it on Eventbrite. Kenneth and I have to do some discussions, but we might be able to do it in person if people want to come in person, but we'll definitely also do it on Zoom for anybody who doesn't feel comfortable. But I also just wanted to let you guys know that next month's class is 100% Q&A class. It's anything you want to ask, you can come and ask. Kenneth put his email in the chat. You're welcome to send him an email with the topic line, just AF Aware question. If you don't want to ask it out loud in the class, you can send that to him in an email, and he'll make sure to address it next month in class, or you can come or join us on Zoom and ask the questions there as well. But that's next month's class. So if you have any questions about anything that you feel like would, that you need help with as far as your mental and emotional health, then Kenneth is opening the door to whatever you feel like you need to ask.
No questions are off limits.
That is a big deal. And you can, like I said, copy his email out of the chat if you want to save it. I will put it in the Eventbrite listing too when I put it up.